Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughn Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about It. It's finally time to talk about Stephen King's It, which is a book I read I finished it a few weeks ago. It took me a while to read because this book is very, very long. It's 1,100 pages, well, more than that in this edition. So it's a very long horror novel, originally released in 1986, and I must have read it in 1986 because I recall getting the hardcover of this and reading it and having a lot of problems with it. But like a lot of Stephen King books that I read when I was a teenager, reading it again as an adult, I actually liked it a lot better than I did when I was a teenager. Although, and I did forget an awful lot. I forgot a lot of this book in the intervening years. Although this book still has a lot of problems. It has one gigantic problem, but it has its share of issues, I think, this book. And it is one of Stephen King's most popular books. So I was really looking forward to reading this. I am reading all of Stephen King's books slowly. I'm going through them slowly, but I am reading them in publication order as the books were published under Stephen King's name. And this, of course, one of Stephen King's most popular books. It has been since it was released. Fairly recently, within the last few years, there were a couple of movies based on this book that came out. There's a new stupid television show. I haven't seen it. I just know it's going to be stupid. There's a new stupid television show that's come out recently, which is based on this on the book and the character of Pennywise. So this is a book very much in the public consciousness, although I think a lot of people know this book from the films and haven't read the book because it is gigantic. There are Stephen King fans that I know that have not picked up this book because it's so big. And that's understandable, considering the story that this book tells, because this book is too damn long. That's one thing we'll get into. This book is a book with a lot of strengths, and this is a book that has a lot of things I think just it doesn't do so well with. Unlike The Stand, Stephen King's other giant book that I've read up to this point, I don't think this book earns its length. With The Stand, I thought was a mess. I thought The Stand was a mess. If you're curious, I'll try to find the video I did on The Stand, and I'll link it down below. I thought The Stand was a mess of a book, but it did earn its length, I thought. This does not. I think altogether this is probably a better book than The Stand. I think the story itself is a good one. It's the execution of telling the story where it has some problems, I think. It's particularly effective in a lot of individual scenes. So this book is about a horrific monster called It by the young characters in this book who go up against it. Now known mostly as Pennywise because it is a shape-shifting monster, but its favorite shape to shift to is a terrifying clown because clowns are frightening. And this terrifying monster arrived on Earth centuries ago and was around when the town of Derry, the setting for this book, was built. And it's basically about a town that has been haunted by this creature. And this creature existing in this town has affected the town itself. And until the point where the town is kind of a reflection of the monster. And so really dark and horrible things can happen in Derry because of the influence of this creature, which spends a lot of time sleeping, but when it wakes up, it kills children. The creature feeds on fear, and children have a pure sense of fear, apparently, and they're easy targets. And so this shape-shifting monster targets children and slaughters children, feeds on their fear, and sometimes just nibbles on them a little bit, and then goes back to sleep for, 20 or 30 or something years. I can't remember how long. But it goes to sleep for a few decades and then comes back and starts all over again. So there's a horrific cycle of violence going on in Derry because of this monster who lives in the sewers. It lives underground, beneath the sewers, actually, Roger. But to get to it, you have to go through the sewers in Derry. And a band of children who call themselves the Losers and the Losers Club go up against this monster and battle the monster and think they killed the monster, but they didn't. And so they have to come back years later when they're adults and try to do it all over again. Try to kill it all over again. And so it's a story about these characters when they're children, their friendship, and how they've changed as they've grown up and how they've grown apart and have to come back together in the town of Derry and battle it again. It's a good story. And unlike a lot of Stephen King books, you get the feeling that Stephen King had most of this plotted out in that he knew where it was going to end up. He knew how the story was going to end. You get a sense of that. Unlike in a lot of Stephen King books where it feels like he just has no idea where he's going sometimes. And some of those books where he doesn't know where he's going or seemingly doesn't know where he's going end up being pretty good books. So that isn't a criticism, really. This book, it feels like he knows exactly where he's going. He knows how it's going to end, but he has a lot of trouble, I feel, getting to that point. He has a hard time getting to the end of this book. And he stretches things out terribly. There are a lot of really, really effective scenes. In fact, the first chapter of this book, the opening of this book, is tremendously effective. And it's a pretty famous scene about Bill is a character in the book, about his younger brother and his newspaper boat that Bill made for him and how he's outside and playing with the boat in the gutters in the rain. And he comes across Pennywise, who is in the gutter in his disguise as a clown. So you have the terrifying image of a clown in the sewers, peeking out of a gutter, out of a drain. The whole opening scene was fantastic. And there are a few really great scenes in this book involving this character Pennywise that are pretty frightening. Unfortunately, this book becomes, and the character of Pennywise, or it, becomes progressively less frightening as the book goes on. Until by the end of the book, this creature has lost a lot of its power, I think, for the reader. When you start getting into this book, this creature just seems horrifically all-powerful. It seems to be able to alter reality to a certain extent. Its powers are never, completely defined, but it does seem to be able to alter reality to a point where it could change things in reality. And it could shapeshift into different creatures. It could shapeshift into your darkest fear, And it could make it so, for example, if it creates a big bloody mess to terrify a child, the adults in that child's life won't be able to see the bloody mess, but it'll be perfectly visible to the child whom this monster is terrifying. And so that's pretty effective. And a lot of those scenes involving the creature, they're very effective. But like I say, they become less effective over time, particularly when it comes to the losers, the Losers Club, the young children who are all around 11 years old. They become aware of what's going on. There's been another rash of killings. Children are being murdered. Our main character, the young Bill, his younger brother is murdered. and he learns that it is Pennywise who murdered his brother. So he's out to get Pennywise. And the other members of the Losers Club, they all together figure out what's going on with this monster. And they all have encounters with this creature. But they all survive these encounters. And very often, it feels like they shouldn't. I mean, it gets to the point in this book where it's like, why is this monster so inefficient? It's killing all these other children, but these particular children it just can't get, when it really should. And Stephen King does, to his credit, seem to realize this and comes up with a reason why. It's just not a very good reason, It all has to do with the power of belief, which is... It's a little bit groan-inducing, frankly. It doesn't work for me. So by the end of the book, the monster is a lot less scary than it was in the beginning of the book. Let's put it that way. There are a lot of... There's a lot of brutality against the children. They are bullied, and the bullies are just terrible, particularly the main bully. There are a lot of human villains in this, or a few human villains. There's Beverly's evil husband, who's a terrific bore, but he's an abusive husband. She has an abusive father when she's young, so she has an abusive husband when she grows up, because of course she marries a guy just like her father. And there are these bullies, one main bully who's frankly just awful and terrible. And unfortunately for me, at least, this book spends a lot of time with these human villains who are they're just such one-note villains that they might as well have a V stamped on their foreheads because they're just so villainous. Just because they have to be for the plot of the book. And they're just really one-dimensional and boring. And we have to spend a tremendous amount of time with the human villains. Because the monster, who does seem interesting, at least in the first half of the book anyway, the monster becomes so ineffectual that the monster needs human agents to go after the children, and later when they grow up to go after the adult versions of the characters. Because Pennywise is just too lame. He can't do it himself. He's just too weak of a monster. And so we have to spend a tremendous amount of time with the bullies and Beverly's stupid husband. And there's a lot of abuse and bullying in the book. And I get it that the thing that the book is saying is like, okay, the humans are the real monsters, which is not exactly a startling revelation for those of us who live in the real world. Yes, we know humans are the real monsters. We know it. We're aware of the news. But in this book, the human monsters are just boring. And especially after the bullying just goes on and on and on and on. This is a very long book, like The Stand. But one thing The Stand didn't do, I feel, is repeat itself as it went on. As The Stand, the book went on, there were new things happening. The plot was developing. It was a stupid plot, maybe, but it was developing in different ways as it went along. This book seems, by the second half, to really be repeating itself. So it's like, oh man, this is happening again. Okay, I have to go through another 100 pages of this when we've already gone through 100 pages of this. It feels like there's a lot of that going on. This book is just too long. And you know what? It's okay to have very simple villains in a book, but not when the book is 1,100 pages long. If the book's 120 pages long, fine. That's the right size book for a one-dimensional villain. 1,100 pages, no. So this is another book where you have a story with really, really good characters. This has a lot of really good characters in it, but also a lot of boring or flat or one-note characters. The Stand was similar. Maybe that's just a thing in these really long books, that kind of thing, you notice it more. This book goes on a lot of really long digressions, as you expect in Stephen King, and very often in Stephen King books, those are the best parts. And some of those parts in this book are particularly good and well written. There's just too much of it for this story, I think. It's just too many pages for the story that this particular book is trying to tell. And also, it does sometimes, this is 1986, so we're still frankly early in Stephen King's career, but it almost seems like a greatest hits of Stephen King, because a lot of things that you saw in earlier Stephen King books, you find in this book as well. A lot of the good parts in this book have to do with when the characters are children, but a lot of that we already saw in different seasons in the novella The Body. And so a lot of the good things that are good about The Body are in here as well, only stretched out, really, really stretched out. And you also have a very complex and interesting city or town that is pretty much a character in the book, which is very similar to what you get or what you got in Salem's Lot. So you get that again in this book. Really well done, though, I have to say. I thought the scenes when the characters were children were a lot more effective than when they were adults. Again, that could just be because Stephen King, he's really good at creating young characters. He seems to really remember what it's like to be a kid, even though the kids very often speak in ways and use dialogue in this book that doesn't always sound right for children. Still, he's got a good sense of that, I think. And so as a coming of age story, this is pretty strong in a lot of ways. I don't think it's as strong when the characters are adults. So towards the end of the book, it sort of has a lot of pages that just drag, a lot of sections that just drag. The ending is interesting, and some interesting choices were made by Stephen King when it comes to the ending. The ending for this is really bizarre in a lot of ways. I like the structure of it, how at the end, you have the children confronting it, and the same thing is happening in alternating chapters with the adults also confronting it and remembering how they confronted it when they were children. And there's a lot in this book about being an adult and how we lose a lot in our transition from being children to becoming adults, including memories. How sometimes we just can't remember our childhoods as clearly as we would like, because it was so long ago and we were living a different life and we were different people, frankly. And this book has a lot to do about that. But there are some things in this and the ending that are just so bizarre that I don't think they quite work. I have a feeling Stephen King was really, really stoned in the creation of this book for a lot of it. I get the feeling cocaine was a strong influence on this book, particularly when we get to the really traumatizing part at the end, at the very end, actually, which is the scene. If you're familiar with this book, you know that it has the scene in it, which a lot of people are able to get past and just enjoy the rest of the book. I have a hard time getting past it because it's just so gross and not in a good way. And it's bizarre. It was a bizarre choice for Stephen King. So I will just have to mention it. So I will just have to mention it. So the children, when the children have, after they have confronted it, the monster, and think they've destroyed it, they are lost in the sewers, you know. They've lost their way, and apparently they've lost their connection to each other, I guess. And they have to get their connection to each other back so they can get out of the sewers. No, I don't know how this works either. And none of them really know how to do that. But the 11-year-old girl does know. She just says, oh, I have an idea. Why don't all of you have sex with me here in the sewer? That'll bring us together, and then we'll be able to find our way out. How? Who knows? It makes sense in Stephen King's coke-addled mind. So that's bad enough. But Stephen King, being Stephen King, has to draw it out and describe all of this in an excruciating detail that goes on for pages and pages. And it's awful. It's just awful. And there's no reason for it. You know, there's no reason for this scene at all. You could have come up with like a million other ways for them to come together and get out of the sewers. I mean, what this even has to do with getting out of the sewers, I don't know. But this is not necessary. There's no reason for it at all. And so it's just this horrific thing. It's one more tragic, terrible thing that Stephen King does to these already abused children at the end of this story. And it's a little much, to say the least. And this really bothered me in 1986 when I read it. And it bothers me even more now. And it bothers a lot of people who read it. But most people can get past it who really like this book. And I have a problem with it. With getting past this scene. I don't think it should be cut out of the book. And I have knowing how publishing is now, you know, in 20 years, when Stephen King is gone, somebody might decide to cut that part out because it is frankly offensive. And they shouldn't, because Stephen King decided he wanted this in the book. And there were no editors back in 1986 who decided that it shouldn't be in there. Because whoever edited this book was just like, whatever Stephen King says, man, that's fine. You would think they would read this thing and just go, damn, no, let me call Stephen and just talk him out of this. But nobody did, probably because they were also on cocaine. Probably. And, you know, to be fair, there were a lot of books back in the olden days of the 1970s and early 80s that had some pretty gross things in them. So this kind of thing just doesn't come out of nowhere. But it was unnecessary. Let's put it that way. That section was unnecessary. There were a lot of things in this book that seemed unnecessary, but this one really did. So altogether, for me, I didn't love it, but I thought it was mostly pretty good. The only thing is, if you've got a book that's this long, it's got to be better than mostly good. You know, it can't be a mixed bag, I think, if you're writing a book this long. If you expect readers to go through this kind of epic length on a book, particularly a horror novel, it's got to be better than it is. And I think for some people who aren't me, it is better than that, because this is a tremendously popular book and has been for years. Some people think this is Stephen King's masterpiece. I have no idea how you can come to that conclusion after reading it, but that's just me. I thought it was a good book. Some sections of it's really good. But there's just too much in here that is just, if you get my meaning. So yeah, that was those are my feelings on it. Those are my feelings on it. If you are a Stephen King fan and you're like, I love Stephen King and I loved everything he's ever written, yeah, I could see why definitely you'd want to read this. And also, if you're really interested in the horror genre, this is a pretty important book, or has proven to be a pretty important book in the horror genre. And so you probably would want to read it for that reason. I can't recommend it, though, for just anybody. It's certainly not a book I would say, you've got to read this. It's not one of those books. But it certainly was an interesting reading experience. Okay, that's all I have to say about it. We'll catch you next time.